All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Let's begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank Yoel and Sarah Kelman for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in honor of all the shiurim and drushos that Baruch Hashem were able to give in the Kehila. So we thank the Kelmans for their incredibly generous sponsorship. And we'll say with that, we also dedicate, of course, our learning in the Zechus of Refuah Shalema for Aviva Bas Shena Chana and for Rachel Yehudis Bas Tova Gittel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, these two women, together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, shall have a complete and enduring refuah. And I say with that, let us begin. We have a very exciting daf ahead of us today. Very exciting. So let's pick up. So today's daf is Pei Vav 86. We left off on Pei Heyamid Beis 85b. Tanya Nami Hachi. So if you notice, right before the lines get wide, so this is the third to last short line. Tanya Nami Hachi. We have a brisa that supports this. Hanosin is Eruv Beis Sharach Sadra Merpeses Ube Chatzer Mavoy Hareze Eruv. A brisa says as follows: if a person puts their Eruv in a base shara, a gatehouse, an achsadra, a portico, mirpases, a porch, bechotzer, in a courtyard, ubemavoy, hareze erev. In all of these cases, we'll say it works. Erev works. So Gemara says, is that true? V'hatan, we learned in our Mishnah. Ain't erev. But remember again, in yesterday's Mishnah, we focused on the concept that halacha l'maisa, you could only place the erev in a area which in and of itself is a domicile. In order for the erev to be effective, it must be placed in an area which serves as a residence. Well, all of these places that you just mentioned in the Mishnah over here do not have the status of a residence. To which the Gemara says, you're right, Ema hareze shituf. To which the Gemara says, you're right, rather mean, it says you could place the shituf. So also remember again, whereas we're going to see in just a moment, for Eruv Chatzeros, the Eruv itself must be placed in a domicile. For a shituf could be placed anywhere in the Chatzer. So for example, although you can't place an Eruv in a gatehouse or in Nachsadra, but you can place a shituf there. To which the Gemara says, shituf a mavoi lo minter. But a shituf cannot be placed in a mavoi. Ema b'chatzer sheva mavoi. Say the shituf can be placed in the chatzer, which is in the mavoi. So we'll say again, and this is the halacha l'maisa. So eruv chatzeros, we'll see this again. Eruv chatzeros must be placed inside of a domicile, but a mavoi could be placed inside anywhere of the chatzer. The shituf cannot be left in the mavoi itself, but the shituf can be placed in the chatzer. I'm Rav Yehuda Mishmuel. Bnei chabur shem subin v'kiddush alein hayom. So we'll see an interesting case. We said name Shmuel. If the Bnei Chabura, group of people, were sitting together having a meal, and Shabbos started, so what happened? Pas sha'ala shulchan somchen alein mishum eruv. So we've seen this case before. So the bread that is on the table can be relied upon to be used for eruv. Va'amrila mishum shitov, and others say it could be used ultimately for shitov. Amarav, Rabba says, v'lo pligi, they're not, there's no machlokes. Kan b'mesum b'bayis, kan b'mesum b'chatzer. We'll say everything depends where they're having their meal. If they're eating inside of a house, then einachinami, the bread that they are using could be used as the eruv chatzeros. If they're sitting in the chatzer, in other words, outside of a home, then the bread that they are using can be used for the shituf. Amrli Abai l'Rabba. So Abai said to Rabba, Tanya de Misameir l'Chav, a brisa that supports you. Eruv chatzeros b'chatzer v'shetufei mevuos b'mavoi. Eruv chatzeros can be placed in the chatzer, and a shituf could be placed in a mavoi. Is that true? V'havinan ba. Eruv chatzeros b'chatzer. Are you allowed to place the eruv chatzeros in the chatzer? V'hatnan hanosin es eruv b'beis shar ach sadro merpeses eno eruv. So we learned in our Mishnah that if you place the eruv chatzeros in a gatehouse, in a portico, right, or in a merpeses, it's not an eruv. Ima eruv chatzeros b'bayis shebachatzer shetufei mavuos b'chatzer sheba mavoi. So therefore, we'll say rather read it as saying as follows: you can place the eruv chatzeros in any home inside of the chatzer, and the shituf muvaos inside any part of the chatzer. And I will say that indeed is halacha l'maisa. So these two pieces of information are incredibly important. Number one, it is only an actual domicile which requires participation in an eruv. This is very important because the Mishnah explained that there are certain areas that are not considered to be a domicile. See, even if a person lives there, right? Our example, the pergola, right? Even if a person lives under the pergola, that's not a domicile, and that person therefore does not have to participate in the eruv, and their non-participation in the eruv does not restrict. Same idea. You could only place an eruv chatzeros inside something which is considered a domicile. And the Mishnah tells us which structures are a domicile, which structures are not a domicile. Shituf muvaos can be placed anywhere inside of a chatzar. In any of the chatzeros which border on the mavoi, shituf could be placed there. So also interestingly enough, as opposed to any of the chatzeros, which must be placed indoors, shituf muvaos could even be placed outdoors in a chatzar. Next, Rabbi Yehuda Omer im yesh sham tfisas yad. So let's remember again. So then Rabbi Yehuda says something very interesting, which was that let's say one person owns the entire chatzar, and he leases out properties to other people. So if he has what the Mishnah called tfisas yad, so we'll say tfisas yad in this context meant what? Tfisas yad meant literally he leaves some of his stuff. If he left some of his stuff in the residences, then halacha lamaisa, all of the residences are considered to be his property, and there is no obligation of eruv because it's all considered to be the property of one person. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im yesham tfisas yad, heichi dami tfisas yad. We'll say, what's an example of tfisas yad? Tfisas yad literally means that the owner is still retaining a hold on the property. Kigon chatzero shel bunyos ben bunyos. We'll say like the property of bunyos ben bunyos. What's the pshat? Rashi says over here, Ashir Hava, last line. Ashir Hava, bunyos was very rich. Umashil batim shebachatzel la'acherim. He would rent out houses, properties to other people. V'hayulu kelim bekulon. And I will say he would retain, he would have some of his utensils, some of his kelim in the homes. So Bunyas had a lot of stuff. So because he had a lot of stuff, he kept kelim, furniture, items in his rental properties. So because he kept it in his rental properties, therefore halacha l'maisa, all the properties were considered to be the properties of Bunyos, and therefore, therefore, if Bunyos owned the chutzner, he would go ahead and maintain his kelim in all of the various structures, residences, and therefore, even though other people leased it out, they still were considered Bunyos' domicile. So it turned out that the entire chutzner really belonged to one person. Because it belongs to one person, therefore, Allah Chalamai says no din of Eruv. So the Gemara says, Asla Kamei Rebbe. So one time Bunyos came before Rebbe. Amr lahu pnu makom leben mea mana. Make room for the guy who's worth 100 mana. So the Gemara says, Rebbe was saying he's a chashiv person, he's very wealthy. Make room for this wealthy person. Asa in shachrina. So another person came along. Amr lahu, Rebbe said, and Rebbe said, top of Peivav, Penu makom leben masayim mana. Oh, make room for the guy who's worth 200 mana. So another guy, apparently more wealthy than Bunyos, came along, and Rebbe said, I'll make room even for the wealthier guy. Amr lefan of Rebbe Yishmael, Rebbe Yossi, Rebbe, Aviv shalzeh yeshel 1,000 sfinos bayam, ukinegdan 1,000 ayaros biyabasha. So Rebbe Yishmael, Rebbe Yossi said to Rebbe, I think you're mistaken. You think the second guy is wealthier than Bunyos. Bunyos is much wealthier. Right? Bunyos' father owns 1,000 ships at sea and another 1,000 cities on land. So Bunyos is much wealthier, yet you accorded the second guy more covet because you said he's wealthier. So listen, this Rebbe says, Amrlo, do me a favor, the next time you see Bunyos' father, and morlo, al tishagrehu bekelim halal lefanai. Tell Bunyos' father to make sure that his son goes out of the house better dressed. As I was saying, so what Rebbe was saying was, the only way I'm able to gauge a person's wealth is through their external appearance. And Bunyos did not come across, he did not present as being an exceptionally wealthy individual, and therefore I gauged him based on his clothing. So tell his father to send him out of the house a little bit better dressed. Shabbos says, the Gemara, this then leads to a very interesting discussion. Rebbe mechabed ashirim. Rebbe used to honor rich people. Rabbi Akiva mechabed ashirim. Rabbi Akiva would give kavod to rich people. And I will say, see, this is very important because it's not necessarily what you think. Sometimes people give kavod to wealthy people because they want something out of the wealthy person. That's not what's happening over here with Rabbi and Rabbi Akiva. There's something different is occurring. Kididar Shrava. So we'll say, why would Rabbi Akiva give honor to rich people? To which the Gemara says something so beautiful. To which the Gemara says, Kididar Rava Bar Mari, Yesh, quotes over here the pasuk from Tehillim, Yesh shev olam lifnei Elokim, Chesed ve'emes min yinsuruhu. So says the Gemara, how do you dash in the pasuk? A masa yesh shev olam lifnei Elokim. When is the world settled before the Ribono Shel Olam? Bizman shechesed ve'emes min yinsaruhu, when they are supported or solidified through chesed and emes. But a little bit of a play on words. Rashi says over here, the min, or man, I should say, is lashon mizonos. When is the world settled? When is the world established by in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? When the inhabitants of the world perform acts of chesed and emes through supporting the poor with food. So Rabbi and Rabbi Akiva would give cover to the wealthy, because the wealthy were responsible for incredible acts of tzedakah. Those acts of tzedakah went ahead and took care of the poor, and it's those acts of taking care of the poor, those acts of chesed, that ultimately go ahead and establish the world, solidify the world in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which Rabbi say is such an incredible yisod. It's part of this idea that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu blesses a person with wealth, so a person has the privilege to be a shaliach Hashem. I will say this is part of the beauty of Yiddishkeit, that we're not an ascetic religion, right? In different religions, so wealth is looked upon as a temptation, or wealth is looked upon as something negative, and the highest level is to swear off any connection to wealth. Yet in Yiddishkeit, again, I'm not going to say it's a wealth ministry, but at the end of the day, there's a very favorable light placed upon wealth. Why? Because when a person has money and a person has means, they have the incredible opportunity to partner with the Ribono Shel Olam, to bring chesed, to bring tzedakah, to bring sustenance, to bring joy to the world. So Rebbe, when he saw an Ashir, what did he say? He saw a partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Akiva saw someone who was a partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So because of that, ultimately they gave them covet. Really incredible. So back over here to Bunyos. So I will say, when we speak about the idea that if the Balabayas goes ahead and leaves his kalim in the home that he is renting to someone else, the Balabayas still retains ownership over it. So Rabbi Bachana says, for example, he leaves the blade of a plow. Now I will say, now what's unique about the blade of a plow? Ultimately, again, it's muktzah. So because it's muktzah, it cannot be moved on Shabbos. That's the type of kli which maintains the tfisas yad, the ownership of the owner on the property. Amar Rav Nachman Tana Debei Shmuel, davar hanital b'Shabbos oser, davar she'eno nital b'Shabbos eno oser. Supposed to listen to this. So essentially, the Gemara says as follows: something which is not muktzah and can be moved. So since the renter could move the stuff out of the house, those kelim don't represent extended ownership of the owner. But utensils which cannot be moved out of the house represent continued ownership of the owner, and therefore obviate the need for the resident to participate in the Eruv. Tanya Namihachi, we have a Brayso that supports this. Tevel yesh lo tevel. Tevel yesh lo ashosh zechol davar she'eno nital b'Shabbos eno oser. So we'll say, so again, so halacha l'maisa, this is very interesting. So it gives the example of tevel, right? We'll say tevel is muktzah. Ashoshes are pieces of steel. So we'll say, so therefore, this is halacha l'maisa. So if somebody rents out a property, but the owner keeps their kalim inside of the property, so we'll say the act of keeping kalim inside of the property says the property still belongs to the owner, which therefore means that what? That halacha l'maisa, the renter doesn't have to participate in it. There is no eruv. The renter doesn't have to participate in the eruv, since halacha l'maisa, the property still remains the property of the owner. The Gemara qualifies what type of kalim maintain the ownership of the owner over the rental property. Only kalim that can't be moved on Shabbos. But if kalim can be moved on Shabbos, then the renter could just as easily what? Move them outside of the house, and therefore they do not represent a continued ownership of the owner over the property. I will say this is an incredibly important halacha l'maisa piece. We'll say Rav Moshe Zechasadik Livracha uses this to discuss the idea: do hotels need an eruv chatzeros? Rav Moshe paskins that a hotel does not need an eruv chatzeros, and the reason for that is since there's an owner of the hotel, and the owner of the hotel owns the fixtures in the room. Hotels are even better because technically the owner could also switch your rooms. Owner has the right to switch your rooms in the hotel. So because of that, we don't view the renters or the guests as individual owners. It is all considered to be the property of the owner of the hotel. Therefore, no Erev Chatzeros is necessary. Similarly, Rav Moshe says, but in an apartment building where the owner of the apartment building owns the appliances inside of the apartment, if the owner owns appliances, that is considered to be that the kelim of the owner are inside of each of the residences. That's tfisas yad, and therefore there would not be a need for Erev Chatzeros as well. A very, very fascinating idea, all based on this yisod of tfisas yad. Says the Mishnah, Hamaniach Beisa, what's an interesting case? Person leaves his home. Haniach Beisa, Bahalach Lishbos Be'iracheres. Let's listen to this case. So imagine we all go ahead and we live in the same chutzner, one big happy chutzner family. And what happens? I leave for Shabbos. Only one problem. I left for Shabbos before I went ahead and participated in the Eruv. So we'll say, so what's the halacha over here? So I leave my home and I go make Shabbos in a different city. Whether it's a Jew or a non-Jew. And both say, so remember again, in this case over here, what happened is if it's a Jew, he left before participating in the Eruv. If it's a non-Jew, he left before we had a chance to lease his rights on the property. So what's the halacha? Mir says that halacha l'maisa, this individual prohibits on everyone else. The fact that the Jew didn't participate in the Eruv, the fact that the non-Jew's property rights weren't leased out, ultimately again precludes the rest of us from making an Eruv. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. So we'll say, what's Rabbi Meir's logic? Rabbi Meir's logic, as Rashi says, is dira below bailim shma dira. That a domicile without an owner is still called a domicile. So we'll say Rabbi Meir holds that even if no one is living in the home, that Shabbos, the home must be represented in the Erev Chatzeros. So we'll say essentially according to, well, we'll see in just a moment. Rabbi Huda says Ino Oser. Rabbi Huda says no, not true. Rabbi Huda says a domicile without an owner, or when I say without an owner, I really mean without a resident, is not called a domicile for resident for Erev purposes. Therefore, if I go away for Shabbos, the Nochri goes away for Shabbos, and we didn't participate in the Erev, that non-participation in the Erev does not negatively impact anyone else, and the rest of the residents could go ahead and make an Erev. So essentially, you could say, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Huda are really having a machlokas about whether Erev Chatzeros is a din in the Gavra or a din in the Cheftza. Right? So ultimately, again, Rabbi Meir holds that Erev Chatzeros is a din in the Cheftza. It's a din in the domicile. And every domicile must be represented in the Erev Chatzeros. Whether someone's living in that house for Shabbos or not living in that house for Shabbos is inconsequential. Right? The domicile must be represented. It's a din in the Cheftza of a domicile. Rabbi Huda holds no, it's a din in the Gavra. Right? Every person who's going to be in the Chatzar over Shabbos must participate in the Erev. And therefore, again, if you're not going to be in the Chatzar over Shabbos, you need not participate in the Erev. Rabbi Yossi says, a little bit of a middle-of-the-road shita. Nas nachri oser, Yisrael ina oser. So what Rabbi Yossi says, that a nachri who goes away for Shabbos, his non-participation in Erev. So remember again, for a nachri, participation in the Erev means leasing his rights. So if he fails to go ahead and rent his rights, he asers on the rest of the residents of the Chatzar. However, Yisrael ina oser. We'll say if a Jew goes away for Shabbos, halacha l'maisa, and he doesn't participate in the Erev before he leaves, his non-participation does not go ahead and preclude anyone else from making an Erev. Why? She'ein derech Yisrael lavo b'Shabbos. Because it will say generally, when a Jew goes away for Shabbos, what happens? He stays away for Shabbos. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, if he's not there, he's not there. So also, so interestingly enough, so you have this three machlokes. Rabbi Meir is saying, Erev is a din in the Cheftza. Every domicile, even if someone's not going to be home there, must participate in the Erev. Rabbi Huda, no, there's no such thing as a dira without bailim. It's a din, right? If the owner is not home for Shabbos, doesn't have to participate in the Erev. Rabbi Yossi, it depends who. A Jew goes away for Shabbos is considered to be away. A Nachri who goes away for Shabbos may easily come back, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, the Nachri, you must lease his property rights before he goes away for Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon Omer, afilu iniach beis avalach lishvos, it's a bito ba'osair ina oser. So also Rabbi Shimon says, if a Jew goes away for Shabbos, even if he's by his daughter, and his daughter lives in the same city, we are not concerned that the Jew is going to come back. Why? Rabbi Shimon says, because once a person goes away for Shabbos, once he closes his door for Shabbos, he closes the door for the entirety of that Shabbos, and there is no concern that he's going to come back home that particular Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Amarav halacha k'Rabbi Shimon. So Rav said that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, and I will say, therefore, once a person goes away for Shabbos, even if they're going away for Shabbos, we'll say in the same city, right? In the same city, very close proximity to where they are, because we'll say, you might say, well, if a person is going out of town for Shabbos, I hear. But if a person is going to his daughter in town, going to his child in town, isn't there a possibility that a person will come back home? Rabbi Shimon says, no. Once you go away for Shabbos, you go away for Shabbos. So we'll say, now watch this. V'daf gabito. But that's only if you go to your daughter's house for Shabbos. Aval b'no lo. I'll say if you go to your son's house for Shabbos, it's quite possible that you may have to come back home over the course of Shabbos. We'll say, watch this Gemara. The Amri and Shikas people say, Navach be'kal ba'ol, Navach be'guryasa puk. So we'll say, the Gemara says literally, if the male dog barks at you, it's okay to stay. If the female dog barks at you, it's a good idea to leave. So I will say, ultimately, again, the male dog is a reference to your son-in-law. The female dog is a reference to your daughter-in-law. So the Gemara says, if the male dog gets upset, your son-in-law gets upset with you, it's okay, you'll work it out. As long as the woman of the house is happy with you, your daughter is okay with you, you could stay. But the moment your daughter-in-law gets upset at you, right, it might be time to go. So also, interestingly enough, so Rav says the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. The halacha follows Rabbi Shimon, but dafka, and again, it's interesting because that's why the Mishnah chooses the case of going to your daughter's house. You get into a fight with your son-in-law, it's okay, you'll be able to stay for Shabbos. You get into a fight with your daughter-in-law, the female dog is barking, probably a good idea to pack up and go back home. Incredible idea. Says the Mishnah, Bor shebein shtei chatzeros. We'll say we've mentioned this before in passing. Now we're going to see it in greater depth. Bor shebein shtei chatzeros. So we'll say now you have a water pit, a water cistern, in between two chatzeros. Ein memalin mimenu b'Shabbos. So halacha l'maisa, you can't fill up from it on Shabbos. Ela imkin asulo mechitza gavoa asar tvachim. Unless, of course, you have made a mechitza, you've made a wall. Ultimately, again, at least 10 tefachim in height, in the water cistern. So we'll say, so take a look. This is picture. Did the pictures come out on the WhatsApp chat today? Good, thank you. So we'll say, so again, this is picture 291. So if you take a look on picture 291, you could see it over here. We'll say in this case over here, just to illustrate this, you have a wall which runs between two chatzeros. And underneath that wall is a water cistern or a pit, a bar. So we'll say, so what the Mishnah seems to be indicating over here is that halacha l'maisa, the wall which runs above the pit is not enough. Rather, you must have a mechitza, an additional partition that runs beneath the wall into the water cistern itself, in order to permit you drawing water from the pit on Shabbos. So again, that's bar shebein shtei chatzeros. So we'll say in order to draw water from that water cistern, you must have an additional mechitza, which is at least 10 tefachim, which runs underneath the wall in between the two chatzeros. Bein milamata, bein mitoch ogno. So we'll say we'll define these terms, whether it is below. Rashi says over here, interestingly enough, bein milamata mefarish bigmar. We'll see what these terms mean. Bein milamata means whether it is below. Bein misoch ogno, whether it is within. We'll say ogno literally means like the lip, the edge of the bar. We'll define this in the Gemara. Rabbi Shimon says, Beishamai omrim milamata. Beishamai says that the mechitza has to be made milamata, below. Ubesil omrim milamala, above. Again, we'll see in the Gemara what this means. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo say mechitza gidolim min hakoso shebeneim. So Rabbi Yehuda says that mechitza should be no stronger than the wall which already runs between the two chatzeros. So we'll say it appears that what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is that halacha l'maisa, since you already have a wall in between those two chatzeros, that halacha l'maisa is enough, and you do not require any additional mechitza. We'll see exactly what he means in the Gemara. So it's a lot of work doing the Gemara over here. Amar Rav Huna, lemata mamish, lemala mamish, v'zeh bebar. So Rav Huna says literally below means literally below, and above means literally above, and both are in the bar. So also you could see this is picture 292. So we'll say in picture 292, so Rav Huna understands that lemata means lemata all the way at the edge, at the bottom of the pit, right above the water line. And that would be Beis Shammai. And Beis Hillel would hold that halacha l'maisa, lemala literally means at the top edge of the pit. That's the position of Rav Huna. The Gemara says, I'm sorry. Rabbi Huda says lamata min hamayim, lamala min hamayim. So I both say Rabbi Huda says, and this is picture 293, that lamata means literally, that's Beis Shammai, inside of the water itself, and lamala means right above the water. So I both say, you see the machlokes, Rav Huna and Rabbi Huda, really captured very well in pictures 292, 293. So according to Rav Huna, lamata means below the lip of the pit, at the edge of the water, top of the water, whereas lamala means at the top edge of the pit. According to Rav Yehuda, lamala means the top of the water, lamata means below the water line. So says the Gemara, let's analyze these two shitas. Says the Gemara, okay, I'm sorry, Rabbi Huda, fine. Rabbi Huda Amar lamata min hamayim. So I'll say Rabbi Huda holds that lamata is lamata min hamayim, lamala min hamayim. Amar le Rabba bar Rav Chanan la Abaye. Hadam Rabbi Huda lamata min hamayim. So when Rabbi Huda says that lamata, right? We'll say again, Rabbi Huda is picture 293, which is Beis Shammai's lamata min hamayim. So when Rabbi Huda says that lamata means in the water itself, maishna lamata, mamish dolo. We'll say, why is it that it's not enough to place it at the lamata, below the edge, below the lip of the pit, but right above the water line? The arivi maya, because Rabbi Huda will say, if you place it on top of the waters are still able to mix. So you must remember again, what's the concern over here? The concern over here is that when you're in Chatzar A, technically speaking, we don't want you drawing water from the side of Chatzar B. And when you're in Chatzar B, we don't want you drawing water from the side of Chatzar A. Because Lamaisa, that's tantamount to taking from one Chatzar to the other. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda will say, Lamata, according to Yashai, means in the water itself. Why can't it be at the top of the water? Because then the waters are mixing. To which the Gemara says, come on. Lamata min hamayim nami ha'arivi maya. I will say, but you could place a mechitza at inside the water. We all know. We'll say, unless you're actually going ahead and damming off that pit, the waters are going to mix. Right? The waters are always going to mix. Amalei, lo shmiya lecha hadam Rabbi Yehuda amarav, umata ba mishun Rabbi Chia, tzarech sheyiru rashan shal kanam lemala min hamayim tefach. So we'll say ultimately, again, Rav said name Rabbi Chia, that in order for this mechitza to work, the top of the reeds over here represent the mechitza, must be visible from the top of the water at least a tefach. And I will say that is picture, you see it's picture 294 still. You're able to go ahead and see the top of the reed at least a little bit from the water. So we'll say the Gemara over here is already introducing us to the concept that in reality, the point of this mechitza inside of the water is not to actually make like a bona fide dam that is going to ensure that Chatzar A only takes from side A and Chatzar B only takes from side B. But rather, again, this is much more of a hecker. This is much more to serve as a recognition. So the Gemara says, Visu. Again, we'll finish Visu. Furthermore, when Rabbi Yehuda said that lamala means above the water level, above in the water. We'll say, why is it that it's not enough just to place the mechitza above, right below the edge of the pit, but above the waterline? Because we'll say if you put the mechitza at the top of, right below the edge of the pit, but not submerged in the water itself, the water is able to mix. But we'll say even if you put the mechitzas in the water itself, the waters are still going to mix. You have to make sure that the top of the mechitza is submerged in the water. But I was saying, listen to this. But we learned another interesting halacha. We'll say if you have a korah is a top beam, right? You have a beam that goes across the top of a chorba. So we'll say in this case over here you have a ruin. Now we'll say, look at Rashi just a moment. Korah dalad materes bechorba. Rashi says, he explains, Korah hatchuva mechoma lechoma bechorba kedera chorvos hanoflos v'nisharma and koros v'ish berach ba'arba v'himu teles al rachba motla taltal tachtel da amar shnei chudei yardin v'sosmin. Supposed to listen to this. if you have a korah that runs across essentially like two posts of a churba, so the presence of that korah allows you to carry. Why Rabbi said this is actually quite amazing, because essentially we view the edges of the korah, we view the edges of the top beam as if they extend downward, creating mechitzos. So therefore, the Gemara says as follows. So what does this mean for us? Korah arba materes b'mayim. So we'll say, here we go, and this is really quite fascinating. So the Gemara suggests as follows, that if you were to go ahead, we'll say, imagine the following scene, same case, chatzar A, chatzar B. There is a shared water pit in the middle of both of them. You want to be able to draw from that water pit on Shabbos. So we'll say the Gemara suggests, what can you do? And this is really quite amazing. You could take a korah, you could take a beam, run it across. As long as that beam is 4 tefachim wide, you can go ahead and run it across the water pit. And I will say, how do we view it? We view the sides of the beam as if they extend downwards into the water, creating mechitzas. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. How does that work? I'm sorry. Akara Ormas Mintaris time. So Gemara says, how could that work? Dali liidach giso maisi. The both say, now I'm going to have another problem. But say, how do you draw water from the pit? How do you draw water from the pit? With a bucket. So what's the concern now? So I will say, now what the Gemara is telling me is, by the way, up until now we were dealing with like a partial mechitza. Now the Gemara is saying you don't even need a partial mechitza. If you have a korah that runs across the water pit, we could view the sides of the korah as if they extend downwards, creating a mechitza, and that's enough. So which means there's absolutely no physical barrier in the waters. Well, if that's the case, when Chatzar A throws its bucket in to draw water, should we not be concerned that the bucket is going to flow over or float over to the side of Chatzar B? And vice versa. That means haka azli dali liidach gisa. The bucket is going to go to the side. I'll say this if you just want to see a picture of this. This is picture 295. Right here, you can see on the top of 295, you see the korah there. And halachically, we're saying that the edges of the korah extend downwards and ultimately form a wall. But are we not concerned that when you throw the bucket into the water pit, the bucket is going to flow to the other side of the korah? To which the Gemara says, not a problem. So the Gemara says, no, we're not concerned because everyone knows that you never really allow your bucket to float more than 4 tefachim. In other words, we'll say people keep their bucket on a short rope. So because they keep their bucket on a short rope, we're not concerned that the bucket's going to float more than 4 tefachim. Okay, but one second, at the end of the day, tachas korah mi'arivi maya. So we'll say, but one second, let's go back for just a moment. You're now telling me that if you put this korah across the top of the water pit, that we view the sides of the korah as extending downwards, and halacha l'maisa essentially acting as a barrier, acting as mechitzos. But I will say the waters are freely mixing. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Ela mishum kal shekilu chachamim b'mayim. I will say rather what it comes down to is Chazal were makel by water. They are makel by water. In other words, that halacha l'maisa, because people have to draw water on Shabbos. And I will say, again, I just want to point out also, remember, water sources themselves are often not usually defined as one type of rishos. So Chazal were makel with the drawing of water. Could a suspended mechitza. A suspended mechitza. So we'll say, what's a suspended mechitza? Kishmo kenu. It's a mechitza that doesn't reach all the way down to the ground. Could a suspended mechitza work to go ahead and permit carrying in a ruin? To which the Gemara says, Amrle in. Yes, I'm sorry. Amrle in mechitza tluya mataris ala b'mayim. As they said, no, rather, again, mechitza tluya, suspended mechitza works in only one place. Where's the one place? Water. Kal hu shekilu chacham b'mayim. And I will say it's a leniency, ultimately, again, that Chazal employed by water. So therefore, I will say, interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, what comes out over here is as follows, which is that when you have a shared water source in the middle, essentially what it appears you're going to require is some type of hakara, some type of recognition. You need something there, but the truth is you don't really need a bona fide partition. Rather, it appears, again, either the korah, the mechitza taluya, or again, these small markers, right, which are enough just to go ahead and make a symbolic demarcation of the space, is going to be enough to allow you to draw water from each side of the chutzner. That is a kal shekilu b'mayim. So we'll say things that would not normally constitute a real mechitza in other situations by water you make. We'll see the halacha in just a moment. So the Gemara goes right there. So say, Rabbi Yehuda lo te mechitza. So let's remember again, Rabbi Yehuda said, I don't understand, why do you need an additional mechitza at all? Shouldn't the wall itself work? So you both say, remember, think about this just a moment. If you're telling me that halacha lamaisa, you could even place a korah, a board across the water pit. And I both say, what do we view? We view the edges of the board as extending downwards. Both say, this is a case where you already have a wall which runs between these two chatzeros. If you have a wall which runs between these two, so why can't the wall just be viewed as extending downwards and allow each of them to take water? Amra bar Rav Chana, Amra Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda b'shitas Rabbi Yossi, Amra. Both say, Rabbi Yehuda holds in the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. What does Rabbi Yossi say? Rabbi say, this is fascinating. The Amar mechitza teluya materes afilu biyabasha. Rabbi say, because Rabbi Yossi holds that a suspended mechitza works even on dry land. So before we go on, so therefore what the Gemara is understanding is as follows. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda is saying, I don't understand why is everybody patching around with this new mechitza. Does the mechitza have to be in the water, out of the water, on top of the water, by the edge of the water, lamala, lamata? You have a wall. You have a wall. So if you have a wall which runs between the two mechitzas, and I both say again, remember, this was picture 291. There is a wall which runs between. Why do we have to construct an additional mechitza below the wall? Just to view the wall as extending downwards. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda holds of Rabbi Yossi. Because Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that mechitza teluya materas, namely, that a suspended mechitza is able to extend downwards, even on dry land. And if we'll say, if it does it on dry land, then alachas kama v'kama, it works where? Works where? By water. Because again, what we've already established is that the definition for mechitza on water is definitely, again, much more kal than a regular mechitza. To which the Gemara says, so let's analyze. Where do we see this, Rabbi Yossi? This is great. The Gemara says, this nan is great. Hamishal shel defanas milamala lemata. Well, so listen to this. If you extend your walls, we'll say this is by sukkah. By sukkah, if you extend your walls, milamala lemata, from a bubble. So we'll say, so imagine the following situation. You begin building your walls from top to bottom. Bizman shegavos mina aretz gimel tfachim psula. So if the walls are more than 3 tfachim off the ground, then ultimately, again, the sukkah is pasal. So we'll say that's picture 296. So again, if the walls are within 3 tfachim of the ground, we'll say that is called lavud. So the walls are kosher. But Allah Chalamais, if there's more than 3 tfachim of space between the bottom of the walls and the ground, that is not a valid sukkah. It's not a valid mechitza, not a valid dofen. So the Gemara says, mimata lamala, but I will say, listen to this. What happens if you're building your walls from bottom up, as long as in givos yotfachim kshera, as long as the walls have 10 tfachim of height, ultimately, again, the sukkah is kosher. I will say, this is picture 297. So even though, again, your walls do not reach all the way up to the schach, as long as you have mechitzas that are at least 10 tfachim high, that is a bona fide mechitza, that is a bona fide wall. So we'll say, this halacha was very widely used this year, as people wanted to build corona sukkahs, right? So again, to allow for airflow. So I was told that in some communities, mamish, everybody built their sukkahs this way, with just 10 tfachim. So that's all you need. You need 10 tfachim of wall, and then again, we'll say, what about the rest? So remember again, there's a halacha l'Moshe Misina that says good asik mechitzta, right? Which ultimately says that we view walls as extending upwards. So this is very interesting. So if you're building your walls from top to bottom, so your walls must come to within 3 tfachim of the ground. But if you're building your walls from bottom up, all you need is 10 tfachim of space. The rest of it could be open, and we view the rest of the wall as extending upwards. Now, watch this. Rabbi Yossi says, oh, kishem shemilamata lamala asara, kach milamala lamata asara. Rabbi Yossi says, no, it's the same halacha, going up, going down. The same way, if you're building from bottom up, all you need is 10 tfachim of wall, and then the rest of the wall is viewed as if it extends up. So too, when you're building top down, all you need is 10 tfachim of space, 10 tfachim of wall. Once you have 10 tfachim of wall, then what? Then we view the rest of the wall as extending downwards. So we'll say, this is Shitas Rabbi Yossi of Mechitza Teluya. Rabbi Yossi says, as long as you have 10 tfachim of solid wall, we could view the rest of the wall as extending downwards. So we'll say, therefore, the Gemara is suggesting that Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah holds like Rabbi Yossi, because what does Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah say? If you have a wall that runs between the two chatzeros, and that wall runs over a bar, runs over a water pit, you don't have to build another mechitza. Rather, what do we view? We view ultimately the wall as if it extends downwards. If it extends downwards, and once it extends downwards, that is halakha lemaisa enough. So the Gemara says, Velohi. The Gemara says, no. Rabbi Yehuda's, I'm sorry, Velohi. Lo Rabbi Yehuda savak Rabbi Yossi, lo Rabbi Yossi savak Rabbi Yehuda. In fact, I will say, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi do not hold like each other. Why not? Rabbi Yehuda lo savak Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda lo savak Rabbi Yossi. Why not? Ad kanu Rabbi Yehuda ela be'eruvin chasiros dirabanan aval sukkah daraisa lo. So first again, I will say, Rabbi Yehuda will say, listen, I only hold that mechitza teluya, that a suspended mechitza works by eruv chatzeros, because that's dirabanan. But I would not apply the concept of mechitza teluya by sukkah, which is a din da'oraisa. V'lo Rabbi Yossi salak Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi does hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Why not? Ad kanu Rabbi Yossi ela b'sukkah the isra asay. But to this, I will say, Rabbi Yossi is okay relying on mechitza teluya by sukkah, because I will say, what's the worst case scenario? If you don't go ahead and eat in a sukkah, right? It's an isra say you violated a positive commandment. Aval Shabbos, the isra skilahu lo amar. I will say, but by Shabbos, where there's an isra skila, and I will say, now remember, Rashi points out over here, afagab de b'shios d'abana leka skila, called the takun rabana came the rice taken. Even though again, I will say, obviously, when it comes to these dinim of erev chatzeros, there is no din of skila. But since Shabbos itself carries with it the punishment of skila, the Rabbanans were treated like the Oraisas as well. So also, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yehuda holds that you could extend the mechitza downward by Shabbos, Erev Chazer, because it's the Rabbanan. But will not say that you could extend the wall downward by Sukkah. Rabbi Yossi says you could extend the wall downward by Sukkah, because again, it's only an Isser Aseh. But by Shabbos, which has incredible severity, will not hold that you can extend the wall downwards. V'im tomar, but maybe you'll say, O samaisa shenasa b'tzipori al minasa. But maybe you'll say, what about that episode? What about that story that happened in Sipori? So who did they rely on for that story? So we'll say, you know what, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Miras Hashem with that story. We'll say, but suffice it to say, here's what we're ending off with. So we'll say, we have to, tomorrow, in Miras Hashem, we'll see the halacha lamaisa. So what do you do? What do you do in order to permit the drawing of water from a common water source on Shabbos? What we have already established is that clearly the halachas of mechitza by a water source will definitely be more mekel than the halachas by mechitza by anywhere else. Rabbi Yehuda, you don't need another mechitza as well. Mechitza teluya have a mechitza. Suspended mechitza is a mechitza and viewed as extending downwards. Rabbi Yossi, even by Sukkah. So I will say, ultimately, tomorrow we'll see a story that happened by Shabbos, was Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Halacha L'maaseh Miras Hashem tomorrow.